this is a special episode. I think for those of you who listen often, special episodes that's not something that I just take lightly. I don't do it very often. Matter of fact, I think I've done it twice. In the last two times, I brought multiple guests on for like a round table, and I know it was Dr. Lori Desautel, Dr. Mona Delahook. I think one was Dr. Tracy Benson. So if I'm doing a special episode, it's for a really good reason. And tonight's episode here on this non-Thursday is one that I got really excited about. One of the guests tonight has been on the podcast before and spoken about her amazing work. But once I learned about this new partnership that Becky Haas, who has been on here before, had developed with a amazing college, and I had to get the team on. And so we're going to be having two guests tonight. The first is Dr. Frederick. She's originally from Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and she's earned her Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education, Social Studies from Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. She began her teaching career in an urban school district in Austin, Texas, which I love Austin, by the way, and taught a middle school history for 3 years before moving to Virginia. She's earned her doctorate of education from East Tennessee State University in 2019 in educational leadership, policy, and analysis. And in 2018, she joined the education department faculty and currently teaches human growth and development, assessing and learning, practicum education students, and teaching seminar. She also serves as the director of the Neff Center for Teacher Education and the education department chair and the CAEP lead. She currently lives in Virginia and is an amazing faculty member of Emory and Henry College, which we'll be talking about. But we also have Becky Haas. Becky doesn't need introduction. I think if you know this work, you know her well, and she's been on this podcast, but she's an international advocate and trainer on using trauma-informed approaches and the adverse childhood experiences study and positive childhood experiences study. She's a pioneer in creating trauma-informed communities, and she does work all over the world. So welcome, Dr. Frederick and Becky. How are you both this evening?
Great.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm really excited. So tell us a little bit, Dr. Frederick, I'm going to start with you. I read some of who you are, but tell us the Dr. Frederick story. How did you get to the work of trauma-informed education? How did it come about?
Well, like you said, I spent 12 years in the classroom, all in middle school, and I love middle school, and I think that makes me weird. I think if you like middle school, you've got a special place, right? It's a different kind of a student. And then I went into administration. I was an assistant principal for 5 years, and of course, if you've ever been an AP, then you know you deal a lot with attendance and discipline. And then I went into teacher prep, and that was my first year in the teacher prep program at Emory and Henry. And I went to a training by chance with a colleague that was Becky Haas. And we were the only educators in the room. There were people from all sections of public work, including law enforcement and healthcare, but there weren't a lot of educators in the room. And I just spent 2 days listening to Becky and just really reflecting on my time as a teacher and an administrator, and realizing up until that point, I didn't know, but realizing at that point that I had been dealing with a lot of students in my office that were, they had an A score. They had seen trauma, and the behaviors that they were exhibiting in the classroom were probably linked to that. And so that just really sparked in me that was something that I wanted pre-service teachers to know about before they went into the classroom, was to understand how trauma impacts growth and development, and how that would impact their classroom, and that there were things that they could do as a teacher that would help change that pathway for that student, to change the trajectory of their life just by the way that they worked with those students. So I started having guest speakers in my coursework, and learning more about it myself. And all of our students at Emory and Henry in the pre-service teacher prep program, they all know about ACEs. They all know about trauma-informed practices. And so they go in to their careers, knowing how to work with students that have experienced trauma. So that's in a nutshell how things got to be. And then I asked Becky to come and speak at our regional education forum. She was our keynote, and she heard what we were doing in the program. And I think it was about 24 hours later, she emailed me, and I was in the car and my hands were just shaking. I told my husband I was reading her message, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I've been hoping for. And Becky was like, we have to partner. We have to get the message out to more educators. And so here we are today.
You said something that like almost gave me, where I'm from, I call them goosebumps. Some people say angel kisses. They're all kind of things that they're called, but I call them goosebumps. It gave me goosebumps. You said that every educator, pre-service educator that goes through your program knows about trauma-informed work, knows about ACEs. Dr. Frederick, that is a goal that we should all have in all of our states and all of our universities and colleges across the country. And it's exciting because you all are pioneers in this work. And it's why you're here. It's why we're having a conversation, because you're not waiting on other people, right? You met Becky. She did something. You're like, Becky's like, we need to partner. You're like, yes. And next thing you know, wow, you've got something that every educator needs to be aware of. And before we dig into it, Becky, tell us a little bit more about you. I know probably if people have been listening, they know about you, but tell us a little bit more, and especially how that phone call or that message to Dr. Frederick was like, we need to partner. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. And it really is great to be back on the Trauma Informed Educator podcast. And you're such a dear friend and really an inspiration to me. When I learned about trauma informed care and ACEs when I was working for the police locally, I just set out to train my town because I was so impacted. You hear a lot in this field, people have an aha moment, and kind of Sandy described that. I know you're the same way, Matthew. And I felt like I would be held accountable if I didn't share that. And then after doing 19 programs for the police with 35 agencies was my job, I trained 4,000 professionals regionally in my spare time and wrote to SAMHSA and asked if we could host a webinar in 2018 of all the communities that were cross-sector training how to reduce the effects of childhood trauma. And they said, we don't know of one, so how about we come to Johnson City, you tell your story. So we had a forum in 2018, 2 first ladies came and people from 20 states. And then I was recruited to the largest healthcare system in 2 states, and a half of their footprint is in Southwest Virginia. So it was moving into that healthcare role, the first trauma-informed administrator. They have 22 hospitals in 2 states, and that's really expanded my reach, where now for them, I was training teachers. I reasoned that if you wanted to improve health in rural Appalachia, let's go after those 50 school districts that were covered. And that's how I got into Southwest Virginia and did training that Sandy accessed, as well as Smith County Schools, Dr. Dennis Carter, the superintendent, that we're going to talk about later. So that's my story.
Well, and I think you're hitting on something that we don't talk enough about, and I'm not going to get into it, but the impact that trauma plays in rural America, and what you talked about is something that we just don't talk enough about. And I've been doing a lot of work across the country, and particularly West Virginia and Virginia, and learning about this myself, right? And so I love that you're taking lived experiences, you're taking regional context, but not just regional. This is a national movement, right? And you've turned it into something. So tell us a little bit. Either one of you, it doesn't matter who goes first. Just tell us a little bit about the program, this creating trauma-informed resilient schools coursework that has been developed in partnership with both of you.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay. Well, we were really trying to think about teachers and how they access professional development and what would be accessible to them with their busy schedules. We know that It's very difficult these days for teachers to have to leave the classroom for professional development. It's hard to get substitutes. It's just difficult to break away from your students to get that kind of really deep professional development. We also realize that the summers are kind of that downtime where you're rejuvenating. So we're trying to think, how can we present this in a way that is just very palatable for teachers and their schedules? And so when Becky and I started talking, we talked about, do we do like a live thing? Do we have people come in? But we settled on this idea. And I really think Becky was the one that spearheaded it, saying, let's do something where we record the trainings and then have people engage with them in an online, like asynchronous module. And so as she worked up what she wanted to do, I was kind of more on the design, on the technological side with our team at Emory and Henry. And so we came up with these 8 modules that Becky kind of sorted into some topics that she felt like would fit well with some educator training. And so, we had a pilot group take the modules to kind of test our technology. And I was really impressed. Some of them, they would put it on their phone and go for a walk in the evening, and they're listening to the trainings and they're engaging with it on just a simple smartphone. Some, in the evenings when everything would settle down at the end of the day, would take the time and watch the modules at those times. But I was really impressed with the pilot group. They were doing exactly what Becky and I were wanting, and they were fitting it in where they could in their schedules. So that was kind of our thinking with it, was to make it asynchronous and give teachers the training they need in the time frame that works best for them.
Well, if that isn't validating to teachers, that in itself, just the thought that went behind how do we get this to educators, to me is inspiring. When you're saying, wait, we know that it's extremely busy, that extremely intense to fit things in, and do not think you have to do it over your summer months. Wow. I mean, that intentionality speaks to the program itself, right? I mean, I've been in some universities that didn't care that I was a full-time student and a full-time teacher or a full-time administrator. It was, this is the assignment, get it done. But the intentionality, to me, that speaks to the core of what you're trying to accomplish with the Creating Trauma-Informed Resilient School. So Becky, tell us a little bit about the development from your side.
Sure.
How did you come up with these amazing 8 modules that you did, and the background to that?
Well, good question. It's came from really what I'm kind of distinguished as in the national and now international, which is so surreal to me, is a subject matter expert. And so I have trained a lot of teachers. So when I worked in healthcare, of the 50 school districts that were in the footprint there, I trained 8 of them, hundreds, in a couple of thousands of teachers. And then now I've trained teachers in other areas of Virginia, throughout North Carolina. I've trained teachers San Antonio, Texas, Northridge School District. It's has 102,000 students. I've trained Sutter County, California. And so when I spoke at the conference that Dr. Frederick told about as a keynote, I had about 45 minutes, and I was just thinking about all this accumulation of information that I had taught. I've taught for Tennessee State University, for early childhood professionals across the state of Tennessee. And I just got to thinking, I really had all this content, everything from the basics of trauma and ACEs, resilience, how to use a trauma-informed approach. I've had schools that asked me to teach on self-care for teachers, workplace wellness after COVID-19. Teachers were front line, were delivering food. So I had a module on that. Then I've also trained on addressing race and trauma in the classroom, because that's a very important conversation in making all the kids feel welcome. And then strategies. I think I'm really known for my practicality to take it out of science, out of theory, into practice. So any training I do, whether it's live or in this course, people walk away and know what to do the very next day in that classroom, strategies. And then we talk about building resilience, that trauma informed care, as you know, Matthew, it's not about knowing trauma stories, but it's about giving teachers new tools to deal with the lingering effects. And so I like to say that if the only tool you have is a hammer, you look at every problem as a nail. So this training that I do, as well as this course that we collaborated on, that's really just a new tool, a bucket of tools that teachers will go away with. And then we talked about the building resilience, and then a roadmap to sustainable change, where I'm also an organizational coach. And we're going to talk here in a bit about working with a school district in Virginia, 16 campuses. I work directly with the superintendent since 2019, and saw district-wide change. So we talk about sustainable change, and then resources. So I have a whole module about how to build your library, things you can share with elementary kids. Once I was very, very scared, teaches emotional regulation, all the way to Jim Sporletter books, and some really great things that I share. And then the last module is the story of Smith County Schools. So I really had a lot of this content together, and really it just kind of fell into place when we decided to partner.
What I hear is there's a lot of thought that went into this, and I think that's really important. And someone asked that's actually listening live, is there any other states besides Virginia? If you're talking about the program, this can be accessed anywhere. You don't have to be in Virginia. You can access this. We have a large listenership in Australia and in New Zealand and in the UK. You can be anywhere and access this, and that's the powerful thing. That this isn't a stress-driven coursework that you have to. This is do it your own pace. If I'm correct, it's a do it your own pace. As Dr. Fedrick was saying, while you're walking, while you're driving into school. I know this is hard to believe, but I love podcasts. So I listen to podcasts when I'm driving. My wife, we listen to them when we're taking trips. It's just a way that we can tune into things. This is the same way. You can access this from anywhere. And I think that's really important. So you just mentioned these modules, and there's 8. So talk about, I find it very unique the way that you all developed the curriculum and the design, right? Because when you think historically, and I've taken online courses, it's usually a person or not a person, and you read a lot and then you answer some questions, but you're like, no, we're not going to take that. We're not going to take that approach. So tell us a little bit about the curriculum design and development that you all teamed up on.
Well, in working to become a subject matter expert, and just jumping back quick to what you just said, Matthew, one of our first students was from Lithuania that is taking the course. So yes, you don't have to be enroll at Emory and Henry. This is just a very usable product. But I began to develop and study as a researcher, hours and hours of research. And I'm actually an audible learner. I'm an avid cyclist. I try to ride 40 to 50 miles a week. I listen to podcasts. I listen to your podcasts. I listen to, all kind of things. And most of the books that I used to prepare for this, I have them on Audible. So really, a lot of the modules were developed because the school district asked me to come and do a convocation or do an in-service day based on what became one of the chapters here. So I prepared for that and would have 4 or 5 book studies that I did. And then in working with several schools and a couple of districts over a several year period, we started doing book studies with the teachers. And some of the books that I used to prepare were actually used as book studies that we would read and then come together every month in our team meeting and talk about. So I saw that these were topics teachers wanted to know about, because that's how I learned about them. They said, come and do a training on this. So I researched, built something out, and then went and delivered it. So I just I've been a trainer 45 years, and everything from police to car seat safety to institutional review and research in the university. And so I just sort of put it together, step by step by step, kind of building blocks, what came first, and then added to it.
And Dr. Frederick, tell us a little bit about when people are going to go through this course, they're going to see Becky in front of a live audience. They're going to see actual teaching happening, and to me, that's so powerful because it's not just talking to a void. Becky, I've been there before. I've had to talk to a screen and record it, and nobody was there. It's so hard. So I know from a teaching standpoint, that probably was engaging for you as well. But talk about why that approach. Why do we make this a live experience and then video it and give everybody that experience of being a part of it?
First of all, Matthew, we had an amazing production team at Emory and Henry. They really pulled out all the stops. That's how supportive the college was when we proposed this to them. And so the look of the training is like a TED Talk. There is that live audience. I think, like you both have said, when you're speaking to a live audience, there's that engagement where you're seeing the head nods and the eye contact. And that helps to give Becky, the presenter, the feedback that she needs to know what people are responding to. So that's a great look of it. As you watch the modules, there'll be questions intertwined in what Becky's talking about. And again, those questions aren't like assessment pieces, like you have to pass 80% of these questions in order to pass to the next section. We've all been through those trainings, right? No, they're reflective pieces. Like when she's talking about community supports, it's asking, what community supports does your school have? Because that looks very different in Southwest Virginia than it does when I was in Texas in an urban school district. And the access that people have to those supports within the community is different. And so it's just getting educators to think about, what resources do I have available, and how might I go about connecting families to those resources, and how can the school provide sort of that wraparound care that students need. And so it's getting teachers and educators and when I say educators, I'm talking about administrators. We have to have our educational leaders on board. And so it's getting them to think about, what would this look like in my school building? What would this look like in my school division? What would this look like in my community? Which is the great part of the Smith County story, is that it went beyond the schools. It went through the entire community. And so that was our goal when we were designing the curriculum and trying to make that dialogue with Becky engaging for the person watching, is getting them to think about and reflect upon how would this look in my own environment.
And, Matthew, my style is I'm a storyteller, and where I've worked for the police, and I've heard those real stories of a 15-year-old, locked in a closet with a mother who's a heroin addict, and can't get us to school. And the principal reached out because the student did well when they were able to come, but just didn't have transportation. We got a bike donated. Within a few hours, the mother came to school and stole the bicycle. And so I tell stories of things. And then we have some videos. We show the Rita Pearson TED Talk about students don't learn from teachers they don't like. And the Chad story, Josh, a couple of young men navigating trauma and what was their support system. So I think some of it came about too in the way I like to learn. And I've taken a lot of asynchronous classes in my hours of research to be a subject matter expert in this topic. And sometimes you're referred to documents to read, or, just a lot of reading, which is fine. But I really wanted it to come alive. And that's just kind of, my style, and to be more engaging. And I was super honored when Sandy reached out about, and her her area where she provides student teaching candidates through her education program. But some of the principals and teachers that I've actually worked with came to the training, and they were saying afterwards, "Oh, we're just more inspired to go and do new things this year." So it was a real honor that some of them, wasn't like, "Oh, it's Becky," but they came and sat there for 3 days while we recorded.
I don't know if I've ever come across anybody in this work that thinks, "Oh, Becky." I think they think, "Oh, Becky." So don't count yourself short, because I don't know. I've never heard anybody other than be excited to hear you speak. So
Thank
little self pat on that back, because you
Okay.
earned that affirmation. So you're going to hear it right now, Dr. Frederick. This is for principals, but I'm also going to tell you, if you ever want to make one principal target, you can come back to Becky and I, because as a principal, you said it right, Sandy, is that teachers can only do so much in that classroom, and they can do a lot. But with a principal and an administrator that backs it, it goes lightning fast, or what I refer to as the speed of trust, right? Because I've learned as a principal that you can say things, but many teachers have had bad experiences with their careers and their schools. And until you show teachers that you mean it, it's really hard for them to get over the previous experiences, which are common with teachers. So if you ever want to think about a leadership one, I've got your back, because I really believe that we've got to get our administrators on board here too, if we really want to see this movement take off. So when teachers go through, or any educator for that matter, when they go through this 8 modules, and again, I want to reinforce to the listeners that this isn't like your typical coursework. This is paced with you. You're not going to get a failing grade, right? You're going to get some benefits of taking through it than just knowledge, but this isn't the stress of graduate school. I don't want anybody to think that. But I do want you to hear, what was your goal, or what will teachers get when they conclude these 8 modules in the time frame in which they are able to complete it? What are they going to walk away with?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Well, I think, we've talked about this before, but, trauma, Becky always talks about the trauma informed lens. When we understand the impact it has on brain development, we understand the impact it's going to have on a child's ability to maneuver through their daily life. I think that when we can look at their behavior through that lens and understand it better, Becky has this great graphic in one of the segments where it's an iceberg. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We have to know what's underneath. And I think when you take on that lens and you begin to think about, okay, yeah, I'm a classroom teacher, but it's not all on me, right? We have this school community, we have this greater community that has resources available. And when I can tie into those and I can understand how those might support the student better, and when we're all on the same page in providing those resources and supports to students, then we can give them the pathway to healing, right? I think that's what I love so much about the first and second modules, is that Becky talks a lot about brain development, and that, yes, trauma can impact brain development, but the beautiful thing about the brain is that we can heal it. And teachers are a lot of times the first healers, right? They're the person that recognizes that there's something that's not quite right. And Becky calls us the tip of the spear. And I believe that. I believe that we're the tip of the spear, and that when we see that and we're able to say, hey, something's not right here, but we can do things to make it right. We can right this ship, right? And so I just think that it provides you with some of the things to think about as an educator. What might be some pathways to supporting this child in that healing process? And I will also say, and you mentioned it before, she talks about secondhand trauma for teachers. And I know as a teacher, and most definitely as an administrator, I experienced secondhand trauma. Here in Southwest Virginia, we have snow days, and there are kids that I worried about on snow days. And if we had a week of snow, I was sick with worry about what were they eating, who was taking care of them. And we experience a lot of that as educators. But I think if one of us wears that lens, and we pass it around our building, and more people are wearing that lens, we realize that we're a team, right? And that we don't have to take it on alone. We can do that as a team. We can support these children as a team, and together we're stronger, and we can make that child stronger because we work together. And so I think that's the thing, that when teachers finish the modules, they'll be like, okay, I know now what's available to me. I know the tools available to me to help better support my students in the classroom.
Well, and I think it's important to also know that I love the way the modules were laid out, because the second module after basic trauma, ACEs, key to trauma informed, the second one is address or trauma informed care, prioritizing self care and workplace wellness. That is so important. And I say that because what I've learned in this work, and like Becky doing it all over the world, is a lot of times we want to see trauma as something that only occurs outside of the walls of a school. When we actually began to look at ourselves, right? And I'm not talking about physical abuse. I'm not talking about those big T traumas, but talking about if we're not taking care of ourselves and our increased stress levels and our autonomic nervous systems that are completely out of whack, we transfer that. And sometimes the way we handle ourselves can be traumatic for a lot of kids. And so I think what I love about the way it's set up is it starts with the adults first, because we've learned all we can do is support families. We can't control them, and nor would I ever think that we should. But more importantly, we can't control the kids either. The only person we can control is ourselves. And we are the models of this. We have to model self-regulation. We have to model co-regulation. And I love that you all targeted that as model 2. Becky, you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I think it was on purpose, I would say.
Yes, exactly right, Matthew. And the fact that I saw how exhausted teachers were during COVID, and with getting districts that wanted me to come, I have a training called Caring for Me is Caring for You. And I knew that teachers were now delivering meals. And in the area where Sandy and I are, Southwest Virginia, and Matthew, you've come up here, you're a favorite to come speak. And United Way of Southwest Virginia is a huge partner in a lot of this work, is that we have areas where 85% of the kids get breakfast, lunch, and dinner all year long through the school district, because we have the mining communities that the mines have been closed for decades now. And grandpa worked there, and it was a flourishing community. But in the last 30 years or so, the mines have been closed. And so I saw how exhausted teachers were overnight, having to bring curriculum online, create the lessons, teach virtual while you had your own children at home. Then we're delivering the meals. Then we're concerns about, will we get sick, and that kind of a thing. But then also teachers are reading foster care reports, are seeing one day foster family picking up the student. And as Sandy said, when as an educator herself, you just don't go home and forget about those things. So I knew that, a metaphor we all understand, charging stations. And I knew that teachers needed to know they needed to keep their self on the charging station, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. And so that's really why we put that in the second spot. You can't pour out of an empty pitcher.
Yeah, and I think that addition of that workplace wellness as well, because educators, what I don't want you to hear, because I know this is not it, is that it's your responsibility to take care of you, and everything else is not it can't change. That workplace wellness is key. It's why we need to have administrators that get it.
Right.
Because people will say, how did you get people on board? My response is always, I treated the educators how I wanted them to treat the kids. My third year, our mantra was pre-forgiven. If you pop off at me and because you're mad, you're pre-forgiven, because we're in this together, right? We make mistakes, and that workplace wellness is key. And let's be honest, I don't know where we are in the pandemic. I don't know if we're post. I don't know where we are because I just had COVID about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So I wouldn't say we're through it. But we know now that educators are not okay. And these are pieces, all of these modules, all 8 of them are what bring me hope because we can't do what we've always done in schools. We've tried that in the midst of the pandemic and even where we are now, and it still isn't working. Even if we do more of it, it isn't working. We have to think about a paradigm shift, which is exactly what these courses are set out to do. And again, stress-free. There's no pressure, right? There's no pressure. This is a self-paced learning process for educators to build not just the resilience for their kids, but to build resilience in yourself and in your own life, not just at school, but also at home. I always debate against this idea of work life balance. I just call it all life. It's just all part of our life. We can't separate them. Our nervous systems aren't like, oh, well, that's a work problem. So when I get home, I'm just not going to, I'm going to not pay attention. Or that's a home problem. When I get to work, it's just going to forget about it. We are humans and we operate in that nervous system. So let's get to the last module because I'm fascinated by this, that it's titled Lessons Learned from Smith County in Their Journey. Tell us a little bit more about this success story. And don't forget that one of the people featured was a guest on this podcast a long time ago. So don't forget, people can finish the course, they go way back a few years ago and listen to one of the featured leaders of Smith County. But tell us a little bit about that last module, because I think it's important to have an example to look towards while you're developing your own practice.
Well, and that was one of the things when I was talking to Sandy about what this might look like. I really felt like, if whatever I could put together, bringing in everything that maybe I had trained, but about 90% of it I had developed also to train to Smith County schools. And so here was a group that could come in and say, we did it. We did it. Everything that's in these modules, we've done it. And Dr. Carter, Dennis Carter, who has been on the Trauma Informed Educator Network, he's a wonderful dear friend, a very respected leader in our region throughout rural Appalachia, and an alumni of Emory and Henry College. And you can't make this stuff up. Yeah. And so I met Dr. Carter in 2019 when I was working in healthcare. And he just said, Becky, you help us. We want to move to be a trauma sensitive school district. And, it's not very often, like you were saying, Matthew, the buy-in. And so for the buy-in to come from the superintendent. And so that in 2019, I went and did a leadership retreat for all his principals, his admin, his assistant principals, central office. And we had a half a day. And in that training, I covered basics and strategies. And then after I finished, he asked all the leadership to write down what would be their first steps, their action steps. And then they knew I was going to do the same training over a couple of sessions for all 700 teachers there. So we did the leadership retreat. He asked them to write some small action steps. Then I went and trained the teachers. And then Dr. Carter's so fired up about it. We co-authored an article for Paces Connection. He wanted me to do a training in a big theater, the Lincoln Theater there. And he brought in judges, the sheriff, the foster care, you name it. And we had a theater full. We trained that because Dr. Carter's area, Smith County, in the healthcare system that I was serving, the data of at that time, around 2019, a typical county was 9 babies per 1,000 born to an addicted mother. And Dr. Carter's county was 58 per 1,000. So he was one of the highest. And the sheriff there, it took about 600,000, I think, to run the jail in 2010 and 2.9 million to run it in 2018. And so that's why Dr. Carter, after hearing about ACEs, saw this was an upstream approach. So we did that the first year. Then here came COVID. And so I created a video during 2020 and trained all the bus drivers, cafeteria, the volunteers, and a unique lens that I do bring to this, and I talk about it in the building resilience module, Matthew, is that all hands are a part of creating resiliency in a school, including how to utilize police school officers. And so Dr. Carter had a great relationship with the Smith County Sheriff Department. And so anyway, so Captain Powers, he's on module number 8, talking about the partnership with schools. Kim Sturgill, who's a part of the trauma informed team, and then Dr. Carter. So then in 2021, Dr. Carter reached out to me and just SOS help. Our teachers are running on fumes. Come in and do a half a day on self-care. So I did that. And then we did a reboot in 2022 and did the leadership retreat again and the teacher training again. And they have sensory hallways. They have the calming areas. They are doing remarkable things. And one little thing I just want to tell quickly here. One day, Dr. Carter called me and he said, Becky, are you sitting down? And I said, well, I could be. And he said, we trained some of the juniors and seniors at Chilhowie High School, which is the high school for the district. And he said, we were just explaining that the backstory of hardship, and you don't pick where you start in life. And these juniors and seniors said to us, now wait a minute, you're telling us that kids that come to school that don't have clean clothes, that might smell bad, that maybe historically there's been bullying. Now you're telling us it's because they don't have support at home. So these students worked with the principal, got a budget of $800, got a washer and a dryer, went out in the community to churches, civic clubs, got used clothes, built a clothes closet and hygiene products. And they started a program called Suds for Buds. And it made me cry, Matthew, when they told me about that. And, and I think one reason I resonate with you, Matthew, and I do with Sandy, is we sense an urgency in this, and that this course, if doctors were misdiagnosing a disease for decades, but now we found science that supported it's not willful behavior, it's survival behavior, then that's the urgency that I knew Sandy had, and when we reached out to you, and that's why this course we felt had to be made.
And you probably have heard me say this words, and it's true. In 2015, at the Barbara Gay lecture in Vanderbilt, I was listening to a neuroscientist and assistant principal, and they told me about ACEs. I wept, Becky. I wept. And I was in a small group. They invited me to a small group, and I remember weeping because I realized what I was doing to kids isn't what I should have been doing with kids. We do a lot to kids, right? And not with kids. And I realized at that point that if I didn't begin to shift my paradigm in my practice, I was committing educational malpractice. Mm-hmm. That was my own reflection. I'm not projecting that on anyone else. I'm not telling people that but that was my own. We were physically restraining kids. I was suspending kids. I was using these things that I was taught to use, right? And after 7 years of implementation, we eliminated suspensions for the last 3 years. When I left in March, and in April, we found out we reward school because of the amazing growth that happened. This work takes time, one, but the results are incomprehensible and they're measurable. And I think people need to know that. And I also want to say that nobody is ever saying in this work that kids, because they've experienced hard things, get to do whatever they want whenever they want.
Right.
This is about showing up for kids and understanding why the child may put the hood up and put their head down, right? The child may not respond. I myself, Becky, had to hold a child the same age as mine in my arms for 45 minutes the day after he saw his father shot in his front yard while he yelled, "My daddy, my daddy." At no point did I think of curriculum in that weeks after that. I was thinking about a family of 5 who had suffered incomprehensible loss, and that we had to wrap around them as a community. And that's what we did. During the pandemic, I sent out a message, which is what got Dr. Bruce Perry on this podcast, because he saw it on social media. I don't care about instruction right now. I don't care about instruction right now. We care about you as human beings. And I think what I hear in this program is just that. We're humanizing students. We're meeting them where they are. We're learning strategies and skills to be able to show up for kids, take care of ourselves, show up for kids, and be who they need right then. And I can't imagine any educator who doesn't need that right now, who doesn't need this type of support right now, because it's harder than it's ever been. We want to validate that for educators, but there's hope. I want to say that for educators. And the hope is in processes and programs like Emory and Henry College has developed. We can't just keep the status quo. We can't continue to do. And like Becky said, the science tells us we know better. In the words of Maya Angelou, we do what we know, and we know better, we do better. This program is going to help you know better and ultimately do better for yourselves and the kids. So, well, last thing to ask you, to the educators that listen, what do you want them to know from Dr. Frederick and from Becky Haas? What do you want them to know right now?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Well, I think more than anything that we hear you. We know that it's tough. We know that your work is never done, and that can be kind of daunting. We just want to support you with a way of thinking and some tools that not only help you do a better job of taking care of your students, but also taking care of yourself. And when we take better care of ourselves and each other, then we have a better community, right? And a more resilient community. And our brains were built for this work. Our brains are adaptable. And so if we know that, and we know that there is that hope that you're talking about, Matthew, and when we join together, we can make that hope not just a dream of the future, but a reality of today. And so I think that's what I'm hoping that educators walk away with when they view these modules, and they're able to engage and reflect on what their community has to offer to students. I think that our children are our nation's greatest resource. What we invest in them, we will get back 100-fold. And so the work, I know teachers are tired right now. I know it's the end of the year. I know that there's testing going on, and it's just all of that's coming to a head. But it's time to start the work now, And so here's this professional development, if that's what you want to call it. But it's there for you to kind of start that work and hopefully end the year on that great note, but also start next year with that toolbox that's going to help us all take better care of each other.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, ditto to everything Sandy said. And we are for teachers, and we just feel the simplicity with which this information comes, that it is going to give you practical tools in your toolbox that's going to help with classroom management and really, I think there's so many things around discipline that take so much time for teachers, that a lot of research that's just now starting to come in. Dr. Carter, we're looking at some things with research with data he's collected, and we see attendance improve, grades go up. And Matthew, you saw that yourself as a principal, and so it's really a win-win that it helps improve school climate. So, teachers, we are for you, and that's really the heart behind this. You don't need a peer-edited research paper to tell you what your gut tells you, is that a student's life outside of school matters. And so our hopes are with this certificate is that we're going to help equip you to do the things that you got into teaching to do.
I mean, I hope all the educators listening, and I know there's educators listening from around the globe to this podcast. I hope you heard that. And whether you're in the US, whether you're in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, across Asia and into Africa, because I know there's people that listen literally all over the globe, you can be and experience this process and program through Emory and Henry College. One thing I didn't ask you that I should have is, how much is it? I never even asked you. And I know it's like, it's an amazing price point, but how much is it to go through this whole program for those that are interested?
It's $200 for the entire 8 modules. which will earn you 15 continuing ed credits that you can use for recertification for licensure here in the States for sure. But if you have a large group, if you have a whole school, then I would ask that my contact information is on the webpage that Matthew has shared, and we can talk about some group rates if that would work better for your school or your community. So, we're willing to work with folks because we feel like the message is that important.
And for those of you who did not, if you're listening to the podcast, you probably didn't see because you're listening to the podcast, you're not live. The website is www.ehc.edu/trauma-informed care. So I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it slow because if you're driving, you're like, wait, how am I supposed to get that, right? Or you're running and you don't have a pen. It is www.ehc.edu/trauma-informed care. And those CEUs are important, you all. I know I've gotten emails like, hey, what can I do for CEUs, right? Well, I would highly recommend that you do this because you're going to get rejuvenated. You're going to learn strategies. You're going to learn a success story all in these modules. So if you want to learn more, go to the website. And of course, you can follow Emory and Henry College online. You can also follow Becky. I know she shares a lot about the program too. And yeah, you can follow me. I'll be sharing some things about the program as well. And before we go, I actually have an announcement. This is the first podcast I've had before something really big is happening for me. So I've got to share this because I'm friends with a lot of people that listen. And you all, we just received word 3 days ago that a long proposal that we have been developing for a long time was accepted as a book with Harvard Education Press.
Awesome.
You all, Harvard listen, I got kicked out of a school. I was suspended by all accounts. This should not have happened. So I am really excited to be joining as a co-author with 3 other authors. Julie Nicholson, we call them the Dynamic Julies, Julie Kurtz and Ingrid Cochran as a co-author. We don't know the title because you all know how the publishing thing works. You have one and they're like, no, that doesn't sound good. So what I say is this is the ish, right? It's reducing stress in schools, trauma responsive strategies to support teachers and students. Something of that realm. So y'all, I'm very excited because like you all, this is about the movement and the work. And here's what I learned. It's progressing quickly. So I'm sure after we write this book and it comes out in 2024, I'm going to go, oh man, we're going to have to write another one because it's changing, right? But I would say before the book comes out, right? Because I'm going to tell you to get that book when it comes out, obviously. Take this program and then read the book and be like, hey, wait, I guarantee you we're saying the same things because this work is about the foundation of science and the movement itself. So much appreciation for you both, the time, the effort you've put into such an amazing program for educators and seeing them, hearing them, and developing for them and with them. That speaks volumes to this, to the work that you do and the work that you are putting out into the world. So, you all, without further ado, please remember the world and do something absolutely awesome. All right. Thank you for those of you who were live. Really appreciate it. I didn't say this on the podcast, Kristen, but thank you for your participation. Thank you for your engagement. We see that you're in. Our guests may not see it, but I'm going to share your information with them because you are in Southwest Virginia and you are on the board of directors of the Pulaski Free Store, which is pretty cool. So I know you shared your email address. I will share it with both Dr. Frederick and Becky, and they can potentially reach out to you on following up. But hey, what I say is take the program too, Kristen, and whether you're an educator or you're just in the community, it's a benefit to anyone. So thank you for joining Psych Care Counseling Network. Thank you for joining and all of the rest of you who are on here that I didn't mention. Barbara, thank you for being here. And Dr. Andrea Woodson Smith, thank you for being on here live. Really appreciate you all's participation. And I will not be here on Thursday. I'll actually be in New York supporting a school. So not this Thursday. Maybe I think I'm back next Thursday. So I'll see you all next Thursday. And as always, go do something awesome. Appreciate everybody.